Hello and welcome to Dining with Death. This episode is on our playlist, Dining with the Deceased, where we visit locations that are supposedly haunted after tragedies, sometimes murders, sometimes mass murders, took place there. Today I'm coming to you from the mountains of southern Utah, just above the little town of Vail, where in 1857, 120 immigrants were killed by Mormon settlers. We're going to discuss the event, we're going to talk a little bit about the area, we're going to discuss the ghosts that supposedly live here and the experiences some people have had with them, and then I'm going to take you into the little town of Vail. We're going to sample the food that the area is known for. I'm Stacy Lee. Let's begin. This event, now called the Mountain Meadows Massacre, was a clash between two groups, the Mormon settlers of Cedar City and Parowan, Utah, and a wagon train of immigrants from Arkansas known as the Baker-Fancher train. The Baker-Fancher wagon train was relocating from Arkansas to California, and this required that they pass through Utah. They could not have known what terrible fate awaited them when they loaded their belongings into their wagons and took off for the western frontier. This terrible and tragic event is one that there are absolutely no excuses for. So as I tell this story, I want to be clear that I am not attempting to make excuses for these despicable acts. I am simply stating the circumstances surrounding the event. There were several factors at play that I must explain in order to give some context. The Mormons had fled Missouri to what became the state of Utah, which was not yet part of the United States when they arrived there. They practiced polygamy, and this, combined with a few other factors, led to a tense and adversarial relationship with the U.S. government. After they settled Utah and it became a territory in 1850, this adversarial relationship continued. Word came to the Mormons that President James Buchanan was sending U.S. troops to the territory of Utah to kind of assume leadership there, as he felt they were rebelling against the U.S. government. At the time, Utah was a theocracy, meaning the church was the government, and it was led by Brigham Young. The Mormons began to prepare for war with the U.S. government. Brigham Young put out word that no wagon trains or groups of immigrants were to receive aid of any kind because, 1, he wanted the settlers to save all of their resources in case of war with the government, and 2, he did not want to inadvertently help any group that might be soldiers sent by the government. Now, this is a really serious breach of frontier rules and etiquette. Crossing the country requires stops for wagon trains that would allow them to rest, to trade for goods, to restock their supplies, and to buy, sell, and trade livestock. When the Mormons cut this off, they essentially cut off all assistance to anyone passing through, and this would become the spark that ignited the bomb of anger and emotion preceding this event. However, there was also a second issue that must be mentioned. A Mormon apostle by the name of Parley P. Pratt was murdered in Arkansas by the husband of a woman he had converted to Mormonism and then married, taking her on as one of his polygamous wives. The immigrants at the center of this massacre were a group from Arkansas, and they had absolutely no idea that they were walking right into the heart of a highly charged situation where the Mormons were angry at everyone that had anything at all to do with Arkansas because one of their apostles had just been murdered there. The members of the Baker-Fancher train left Arkansas before this murder even occurred and had no knowledge of the event. The wagon train then comes into Salt Lake City, weary and running low on supplies, expecting to rest there, to trade for badly needed goods, and to purchase livestock and fresh horses. Instead, they are turned away and told to leave immediately. This made some of the members of the wagon train very angry, and a few of them that had joined the wagon train were actually from Missouri, and it's rumored that they talked openly about having the real gun that killed old Joe Smith, who was the founder of the Mormon church that was killed in Missouri. So word of this spreads through the Mormon settlements clear down to the south end of the state, and the Mormons were not happy about it. After the Baker-Fancher train is turned away in Salt Lake City, they have to head to the next stop on the trail, Cedar City. That's my hometown, which is in the southern part of the state, in hopes of receiving a more hospitable welcome there. So they get on what is known as the Old Spanish Trail, and they prepare for the long journey of about 270 miles. Somehow a rumor begins to spread through the various Mormon settlements that the Baker Fancher wagon train has poisoned a well on the trail, which resulted in the death of some cattle and a few people who ate the poisoned meat. Now, there is absolutely no proof of this, but it only served to increase already high tensions in the area and the anger the Mormons already had for this particular group. The Baker Fancher party left Corn Creek, which is presently called Kanash, and traveled past Parowan, Utah, which is the small town you pass through to get to the world-famous ski resort, Bryan Head, and went further south into Cedar City. Again in Cedar City, they were turned away and refused the opportunity to trade for supplies or to rest in Cedar City. There are varying accounts of the events that occurred in Cedar City, but to surmise it, it seems a few members of the Baker Fancher party, very angry about being refused the usual frontier services of trade and purchase, went to the home of the Cedar City mayor and church stake president, Isaac C. Haight, spelled H-A-I-G-H-T, and stood outside yelling things like, "If you're a real man, you'll come out and face us." Haight was angry and embarrassed that his police force was no match for the wagon train, and it seems this insult to his pride was the spark that lit the match. On Sunday, September 6th, Isaac Haight held his weekly stake high council meeting and told the men of the area that he wanted to enlist the local tribe of Paiute Indians to kill the immigrants. There were some who agreed and some who disagreed, so the decision was to send an express rider to Salt Lake City with a letter to Brigham Young asking his permission and instruction on how to deal with the settlers. What most of the council did not know is that Isaac Haight had already set the wheels in motion for a massacre. Haight had already quietly enlisted William H. Dame, the mayor of Parowan, to gather men and assist him in his plan to attack the Baker Fancher wagon train. The wagon train had moved south on from Cedar City and had set up camp in a large grassy mountain-ringed area known as Mountain Meadows. They remained there for almost 2 weeks resting. There was water and fresh grazing for livestock, and even though they were very low on supplies, they were still able to eat, and were looking forward to the short 40-mile trip out of the Utah borders so they could get assistance at the next settlement in Arizona. On September 7, 1857, Isaac Haight gathered his men from Cedar City, and William Dame gathered his from Parowan. All Mormon men were members of the militia in these days, so again, while I'm not making excuses for anyone, there was some expectation that they would follow orders. They were living in a theocracy. The church was in charge. The leaders had also convinced a large group of Paiute Native Americans to join them by playing on their fears of outsiders and by promising them cattle and other forms of payment for their assistance. The Mormon militiamen dressed in Paiute tribal wear to disguise themselves as Native Americans, thinking this would prohibit any blame being cast on the Mormons and stop any repercussions from the U.S. government after the attack. The large group rode about 30 miles to the meadows that again are ringed with mountains, surrounded the immigrant wagon train, and attacked. As soon as they began shooting, the Baker Fancher party circled and lowered their wagons, chained the wagon wheels together, and dug trenches around their makeshift fort, throwing the dirt they dug into the wagons to make them heavier and more fortified. 7 immigrants were killed in the opening attack, and the members of the Baker Fancher party buried them inside the circle formed by the wagons. 16 more were wounded on the first day. The attack continued for 5 days, with the Baker Fancher party trapped with no water and little food. I just want to take a moment here and talk about what this must have been like. You're a father or a mother with your little children, your teenagers, your babies, your friends, your family members, trapped in an open field with absolutely nowhere to go. People are shooting at you from all sides. You have no water for days on end, and you're running out of food. Just think about that for a moment. I don't know that I can think of a situation where you would feel more helpless. On the 5th day, the Native Americans began to leave. The members of the Baker Fancher party were much better shots than what they had anticipated, and they were losing a lot of tribe members. Word begins to spread among the Mormon militia members that the wagon train members know most of them are not Native Americans, that they are in fact white Mormon settlers, and it is with this realization that an unthinkable plot is formed. The Mormon militia men know that anyone left alive will report the attack. The men will surely be tried and hanged, and they decide they will not let that happen. On Friday, September 11, 1857, 2 Mormon militiamen approach the Baker Fancher party waving white flags. They are followed by a tribal elder and a militia officer, John D. Lee, who was acting as the leader of the militia from the beginning. Lee tells the immigrants that he has negotiated safe passage for them and that he and his men will protect the wagon train from the Native Americans as they leave. Women and children are loaded into the wagons, and each male over the age of 12 is made to walk with a militiaman pointing a gun at them. As soon as the wagon train begins to move, a prearranged signal is given, and each militiaman turns his gun on the immigrant he is escorting and murders them in cold blood. The militiamen then go to the wagons and murder every single woman and child, sparing only 17 toddlers under the age of 5, too young to tell the story of what had occurred. As I read this narration, my mind is racing through all of the awful subjects I have covered, the terrible crimes I have studied, and I don't know if I can think of one that is more cowardly, more monstrous, or more dastardly than this act. To make a promise of safe passage only to lead over 100 people to cold-blooded slaughter is truly one of the most treasonous and despicable acts I can think of. The 17 children who were spared were spread among Mormon families to raise as their own. The wagons, horses, livestock, boots, clothing, guns, and all other property from the wagon train were split up amongst the Mormon settlers, and a few head of cattle were given to the Paiute tribe for their assistance. The many bodies were buried no deeper than 2 feet, which left them susceptible to animals, and stories are told of seeing bones scattered across the meadow decades after this terrible event. The only person prosecuted for this cowardly crime was John D. Lee, who first tried to blame the Paiute tribe and then later stated Brigham Young was behind it. That was thought to be the case for many years, and many still believe he had a hand in it. All agree he had a hand in trying to cover it up. But many historians now agree it was mainly the work of Isaac Haight and his men from Cedar City. He was angry at the thought of outsiders from Arkansas coming through his town and insulting him when he refused to trade with them. It would take another whole episode to discuss what happened to all of the militiamen, but John D. Lee was executed for this crime. In 1990, descendants of the Baker Fancher party victims and descendants of the Mormon settlers designed and erected this monument. In 1999, the remains of at least 28 of the massacre victims were dug up with a backhoe accidentally when building the monument. One of the men who was there when they were uncovered said, "I saw clothes, I saw buttons, I saw pieces of pottery, and I saw a lot of tiny children's bones." The forensic evidence showed that the male victims had been shot by firearms at close range, and the female and children had been killed with blunt force trauma to the head and body, so they were beaten to death. In 1955, this monument was constructed in the town square of Harrison, Arkansas, to memorialize the terrible fate that fell upon the wagon train from their small area. In more recent decades, the leaders of the Mormon Church have expressed that they have, quote, sincere regret and have vowed to maintain the monument in perpetuity out of respect for the victims. The church now owns the site, and it was designated as a National Historic Landmark in 2011. The day we set aside for production just happened to be the day of a rare spring snowstorm. We were the only people here, and it was deathly quiet. I was very happy not to be alone here. The snow fell and the wind whistled through the bare treetops, and I felt very, very sad. There's a heavy feeling in the area, and as we crossed this little bridge to get over to the monument, I stopped for a moment to recall the story of how the bridge builders found 2 entire skeletons right at their feet as they dug the footings. As you can see here, the monument is a large fenced-in square. This large rock cairn lies at its center, made to resemble the original monument erected in 1859, which had a plaque that read, "Vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord." When the original was erected in 1859, U.S. soldiers gathered and buried 34 bodies in the ditches dug by the immigrants in an attempt to fortify their circled wagons. Many bodies still lay out here. Small stone placards engraved with the names and ages of the victims lined the entire monument, and people have left small tokens at the site. It is very, very sobering to stand here looking out onto this meadow, knowing that the ground is soaked in blood and some of the bodies of the murdered lay out there alone. Visitors report hearing women sobbing when they know there is no one there, children wailing for their mothers, and babies crying in the distance. Visitors have reported seeing a woman walking across the meadow as if she is searching for something. Many people report seeing children running through the fields only to disappear. As recently as 2014, a California archaeologist uncovered bodies buried under these rocks at this spot in a ravine. After excavation, 2 mass graves were discovered. One of the graves is 35 feet across. More women and children were located next to it. Paranormal investigators report and record voices and strange experiences and report that the site of the Mountain Meadows Massacre is one of the most haunted locations in America. No matter where on the belief in ghosts spectrum you lie, there is no denying that this is a site that houses a dark and heavy history and a story that deserves to be remembered. Time to lighten the mood a little. The site we just visited is a short drive from the little town of Vail. Now, you would think with a haunted meadow just north of town, that's what the town would be known for, right? Well, it isn't. If you ask a local, any southern Utah local, what the town of Vail is known for, they'll tell you one thing: pies. Yes, pies. Maybe that and the natural Springtown swimming hole, but mainly, it's pie. This right here is pretty much the entire downtown area of Vail. It's tiny. It lies about 20 minutes north of the St. George, Utah area that is home to about 200,000 people. There is a very steep incline from St. George to Vail, and that's why it's raining today in St. George and snowing here in Vail. We stopped into the famous little pie shop. As you can see, it's very small and the tables have been removed because of COVID, but we were able to purchase some pies and took them to a park down the mountain to try them. The shop has been open for 30 plus years. Evelyn Daniels and her husband Larry owned the Vail Merc. That's what we call a mercantile here in Utah. And she started making pies to bring in more customers. It worked. There have been a few owners here at the shop, but they've all been very careful to carry on the quality and tradition that have made these pies so popular. We bought 1 cream and 1 fruit. This is their peach pie. I love peaches, but I don't always love peach pie. This pie might change my mind on that. It is absolutely fantastic, and it's not even peach season. The fruit is fresh, not soggy, not underripe, and the crust is divine. It's flaky and tender and tastes absolutely nothing like what you would get at a grocery store. This is grandma quality right here. The banana cream is luscious and smooth. I personally don't care for Cool Whip and would prefer real whipped cream on this, but the filling couldn't be better, and again, the crust is divine. I think a few people wondered who the weird lady sitting in the rain eating whole pies was, but that's okay because I was thoroughly enjoying myself. I'm always so happy to eat at a place like Vail Pies. They're a reminder of times gone by, but also a reminder that terrific old-fashioned American food is still being made, and that makes me feel happy after a bit of a tough day. This was a fun and interesting little trip through a place with a long history where a terrible event occurred. I hope we learn the lessons it has to teach us and that we do better in the future. Thank you for joining me today on Dining with Death, Dining with the Deceased. Like and subscribe if you'd like to see more. Stay safe, be kind to each other, and I'll see you next time on Dining with Death. Bye.